Welcome to the Crypto Blue Hour. I'm Eric. This is Charlie. Every week we get together and talk about give an insider's perspective on the emerging technology space. How you doing this week, Charlie?
I'm good, man. Things are good. It's warm in New York City. I've got, yeah, it's good. Things are good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I've had a stomach bug, but which isn't cool. But
It
other than
sucks.
that,
Yeah, I know. I had no idea until you told me. I'm glad that you don't seem bad. For those listening who think I'm mean, I offered for us to, do this a different time, and Eric's like, "No, we must." I was like, "Okay, cool."
yeah, I know I'm on a schedule and I shall keep it. But yeah, man, this week we got a fun one. We're going to talk about a few things, basically real world use cases for smart contracts. And then if you've been listening, you're one of our loyal 35 subscribers. We're going to expand the scope of what we talk about normally. We've kind of stuck to blockchain and DLT technology. We're opening it up to AI and other emerging, fields of technology because we figured out that we're both very excited about things being built in AI, and we're using them a lot, and it makes sense to talk about it. So get ready for that. A little bit of evolving.
Definitely.
Hey, man. But do you want to kick it off?
Yeah. So we'd spoken a couple of weeks back about smart contracts specifically. You had some really good examples of smart contracts being used sort of in the wild, so to speak. So like the what's the name of that massive the Mayo Clinic that's using it for clinical trials is a really cool real world use case. And there are lots of other ones, but ultimately, not ultimately anything, but there are two other ones that have most recently come up. One of which was sort of in a headline either this week or last week, which is pretty cool. It's about NFT ticketing, like tokenizing tickets and keeping them on a blockchain or distributed ledger, and making it such that those can be transferred peer to peer. And I went to a basketball game this week, and I was thinking about it. If there was more of an incentive, like I don't have a physical ticket for the game that I went to on whatever day of the week this week, but I have some tickets from when I was a kid, and I go to the Knicks or something, and it meant a lot to me to have those. I don't really know why. I think I probably still have them somewhere, but there's like this weird human sort of reaction or instinct to want to kind of have ownership over something that was meaningful as a memory to yourself, like a physical representation of something, or even potentially even a digital representation of something. And that sort of like falls very much in line with what blockchain can provide you. It's a digital record, but it's ultimately visible to anybody to validate. And then it's also something you can attribute to yourself with certainty, with you can point to your address and say, this is mine, and prove it.
There's proof that it's there,
cool.
and it's cool and verifiable. Like, imagine if the Knicks had a local artist and,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, from somewhere in New York who designed a special ticket for that game. You'd also have that. You'd know that there's only X thousand amount, and you could show it to people. You could even highlight it. There's cool little cases.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you could get it printed out as well.
Exactly. It's just that behind Eric in the background there is an NFT that his partner printed out for him, for example. So like you can obviously have these as they don't need to be digital only, but that is sort of where the validation lives, and so there could be a validation that actually does live on chain somewhere. But nonetheless, with the ticketing itself, the headline was about actually airline tickets and an airline in Argentina is leveraging an organization called TravelX. So travel, the letter X.io. And they're pretty cool. So what they're doing is so I think that the relevant fundamentals for NFT ticketing are really the fact that it's so transparent. So you can validate these things. It's very, very clear that it's yours. It's not something that it's not as easy to steal as something that's a piece of paper, for example. It's also tamper proof. And so it's something that ultimately can't be changed. It's editable within certain parameters that are defined by the people who architect it, and then it's peer-to-peer, and so you can transfer these things. That's one of the biggest differences between NFT ticketing for airlines and the current systems. So right now, like if my name doesn't there was once a time when I was a kid that I was pushed away from an airline because my mother had put in Charlie, and my legal name is Charles, and there was a big to do about that when I was a kid. I don't remember the specifics. I remember not being able to go somewhere as a result of that, though. But the idea here is that with this specific application from TravelX.io, it actually allows for you transfer these very flexibly and reliably. So like if I wanted to share with you, if I own a business and I want to buy a ticket to a conference, and so I buy the airline ticket for that conference, and I plan on building the team out over the next 9 months before that conference, I could put my own name on there and then transfer that ticket when the time comes to Eric or somebody who's going to be actually attending the conference. So it provides a lot of flexibility for purchasing tickets ahead of time. Also, obviously, a very similar use case to that is gifting tickets, right? So you're able to share them with people if you wanted to.
I'm sure you can
So
update the metadata for the name too, right?
exactly, that's what they're saying on TravelX, is that the blockchain that they leverage is Algorand, which is a layer 2 on top of Ethereum, and that's the one that they went with. And so I'm not exactly sure the genesis of that, other than the fact that their founding board has some exposure to that blockchain. So there's a little bit of familiarity there, but really cool. So I thought that was sort of an exciting use case, and something that people were talking a little bit about, but I wasn't really sure how they were using it and why it's innovative. And so it was interesting to see, like, they also were saying that when they overbook flights, it would allow for somebody to also make revenue on the ticket that they purchased. And so because it's theirs under their own ownership, if they're stuck in some place and there's very high demand and I have more flexibility than others, I can sell that ticket on the spot. And that allows for me to obviously make money on something that I own, as opposed to it being as a part of a third party. And then, so a pretty interesting use case there. They're also saying that one of the other new use cases is like groups purchasing tickets in groups, and influencers getting discounts on tickets allows for them also more flexibility and giving those away, and actually like literally peer-to-peer transfer of those tickets. It's just that technology just doesn't exist right now. That's not how the infrastructure works, obviously.
Dude, I will say for airline tickets, it seems I've had a few flights where they've completely fucked up the amount of people who bought
It happens
tickets
all the time.
versus supposed to be on there.
Yeah, it's
And
crazy.
it seems like one of those things where like, oh yeah, the ticketing system, like why would it need a blockchain? I mean, they're building it, so they clearly know that there's some sort of need for it. But
Yeah.
I can say, I got I think I got $2,000 once at a long layover in JFK before going to Barcelona. And so they were looking for people to put off their flight by 3 hours. And they needed like 10 people on from going from Austin to New York, which was crazy. So
Wow.
I've seen it happen a bunch of times where they've been like offering huge discounts. So I'm sure there's some cost savings on their side too, if they can make it so that they don't have to worry about overbooking in that way.
Yeah, pretty cool. When I search for tickets, like I use Google Flights a lot, which is a great tool because it aggregates a lot of other things. But I've used lots of other aggregators too, like Priceline or Kayak, or there are so many, or even like Hopper is a native iOS app, and like there are so many.
Yeah.
It just feels as though there's like it's a very inefficient space. There's also all these credit cards that are involved, and so like it's just a very weird, convoluted process of buying tickets sometimes.
Yeah.
And then my sister's always sending me screenshots of flights that are $25 from Chicago to different places. And it's like, where do you even find these? And she's like, I'm on these newsletters where it's like, so they like underbook flights sometimes, I guess. And then they need extra people. And so you can do it for cheap. I don't really know, but it just seems like
$25 is crazy.
Yeah, super cheap. Yeah. It's like more expensive to check a bag, but like, but yeah, nonetheless, this is a real world use case of NFTs being used as tickets, and so the airlines are considering this. There's also there's already a consortium of different airlines that are considering this and working on it, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that. It's not terribly in depth, or like there's not like a ton of like there's not that much to dive into here. An airline is literally using NFTs for tickets, and tickets themselves are immutable representations of something with a specific owner. And that non-fungible token in this instance is ultimately a ticket. So it makes perfect sense to me. Pretty cool.
Yeah, dude. Love it.
Yeah. And then the other example, which I think is interesting, is insurance. So we were talking about some different I was recently reading something. There's an organization called Lemonade, as in the drink. Actually, you had given us a spicy lemonade recipe a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it's kind of funny. But Lemonade they work on the Avalanche blockchain, which is an EVM compatible, Ethereum virtual machine compatible layer 1. And Lemonade is one of many organizations. There's also so insurance as an industry is a much more, there's a lot more going on in terms of the monetary value. The market cap of insurance is larger than that of airline travel. So this is a little bit of a larger industry. And also there's this industry is rife with fraud. According to the FBI, there's tens of like 40 billion in annual fraud in the insurance industry, excluding healthcare. Jesus. And so it's like, like unfathomable numbers, and that was from the FBI. It's like, well, that seems crazy, but sure.
Yeah, gotta call in
So
the FBI on that one.
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, so when it comes to insurance, like at a very high level for people like ourselves who use insurance to insure our cars or our motorcycles or different, or even home insurance, or flood insurance, depending on where you live. Like there's so many different types of insurance, and ultimately it's just incredibly complex with many third parties and sort of steps in between, and a lot of validation, a lot of duplications of steps. And so, as a result of all those costs and just sort of the breadth of the size of the industry and the number of people who work in that industry, there's just a lot of excitement and interest from those folks. And at least at a very high level, the technological folks and the decision makers are thinking a lot about implementing blockchain tech as a solution for not only fraud prevention, because distributed ledgers are obviously tamper proof inherently. So it's not like somebody can go in and edit things without everybody else noticing. Depends on the blockchain that they're using. If it's centralized, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so I don't mean to seem naive, but at a high level, this is something that's being researched. It's not really something that's being done in practice yet, other than something like Lemonade. Lemonade is using it at a very small scale for micro farming in Kenya, I believe. And that to me is very exciting, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. But ultimately, the reason that they're considering this technology is fraud prevention. It streamlines the claims processing. And so like when I crashed a motorcycle not long ago, I took photos, sent them in. Somebody came and they then took their own photos to validate my photos, and then they took those in. And then somebody came and picked up the bike since it was totaled. And when they came, they also took photos. And so there's just all these duplications of processes, and no one really knows what they're supposed to do and what everybody else is supposed to do, because that third step shouldn't necessarily have photos, because the broker himself already validated it. So I thought it was interesting how like there's this like lack of
Yeah,
communication. So that's another thing, is streamlining the claims process. And then also at a high level for an industry that does trillions of dollars, it allows like those small like fractional costs of each of those transactions, whether it's automating something that's a very manual process, or eliminating duplication. That's obviously cost savings. It can lead to cost savings. And then improved customer experience. I thought this was interesting, is that the more transparent and streamlined it is, the happier the people with the claims are, the users of the insurance are. So
yeah,
it's not necessarily perfect, obviously. Like scalability is a massive issue when it comes to these blockchains. Like they can be cost prohibitive. There are people obviously working on these things, but I think that maybe is one of the bigger issues. And maybe the biggest one is ultimately interoperability. If different insurance providers all use different blockchains or distributed ledgers, and then you have all of these walled gardens that can't communicate with each other, it becomes very inefficient very quickly. And so that's probably why we're not going to see any sort of mass adoption until there's maybe a blockchain that's really institutionally adopted at a high level by many insurers. Or maybe there's I'm not exactly sure how that would ever look, but ultimately, it's hard to imagine that all of these blockchains and distributed ledger sort of layer ones, so to speak, will exist in the next 30 years, just because there doesn't really seem to be that much utility that's novel in most of them. And so it will be interesting to see which are maybe the most cost effective for insurers to use,
yeah,
because they're not going to be able to each use their own, because interoperability, that you need to be able to pass messages between. It just has to work that way. And so it'll be very interesting to see who's the winner in that sense, like how they're able to mitigate the costs and keep the costs low and things like that. So, but
yeah.
yeah,
And
insurance is
Avalanche is a
interesting.
pretty cheap blockchain, which is cool. But
It's a good point.
it's one of those things where, who's going to get them? Like, if you can prove that it works for a very wide insurance use case, you can probably get a lot more insurers to come onto that chain if you want. But it's almost impossible to get everybody to, the way things are currently. You're not getting everybody on a single blockchain. So people are building tooling around interoperability for sure. But it's one of those things that I think it's really cool that they're testing it and looking at
Yeah,
it for that, because I don't understand how insurance works at all, really.
I know it's
But
crazy.
I have it. But
Yeah, exactly. The last thing I'll say that I thought was interesting before we hop into some AI stuff is that when it comes to the Lemonade is using it, I think that use case is one of the things that gets me most excited, harkening back to Zambian use cases and different technologies. So a lot of people I don't really know firsthand from Kenya, but in Tanzania and Zambia and Namibia and even Zimbabwe and Mozambique and these different places I travel a lot, a lot of people are subsistence farmers, and so they're farming maize, because then that allows for them to they sell some of the maize, but they also are able to make meal. They use the ground up maize to make nsima, which is like really the majority of the calories that folks eat. in the villages in Zambia where I lived, for example. But ultimately, there's not always good. There's no irrigation on the farms. It goes without saying, maybe. And then, in addition to that, as a result of that, the seasonal harvests that folks have are very much reliant on the weather, and the weather is not always so necessarily favorable, obviously. And so, with lemonade specifically in Kenya, they're working with farmers, and they're providing them with very, very inexpensive insurance, and that insurance is triggered not because somebody is going around and validating it, but because they're also leveraging an oracle. And an oracle, when it comes to a blockchain, an oracle validates information. And in this instance, that oracle is not providing any sort of validation of price information, which is the most large use case of oracles, but it's very, very, very small sliver of what it could be in the long term, because this oracle is leveraging weather data. And so if that weather data is actually reflecting that there is a drought and there have been 3+ weeks of no rain in this one area of the world based on satellite imaging and weather meteorological data that's provided to the oracles, it then automatically, the smart contract automatically triggers the insurance, and that farmer receives their insurance automatically through the app. Pretty crazy to use the weather data through an oracle. Pretty cool.
Yeah. And with a system that can automatically pay out, like what a claim is what
exactly.
So, they don't have the money or the food to feed themselves. It's like, oh, well, here's money. It's automatically, it can be in your account once that gets verified in less than a minute, which is crazy. And you don't have to have 3 people come out and take pictures of your land and bring a soil sample back to some lab and be like, hey, it's pretty dry.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really cool, the automations, like this, the abstraction of the current process. And I think this is another example we've spoken about in the past of leapfrogging a lot of infrastructure. So there doesn't need to be this, like, there isn't currently that much of a very prevalent insurance culture in those areas. And so the way that we'll see insurance institutionalized or instituted in those areas will be maybe not inherently different from the way that we've seen it, but it'll leapfrog many of the learnings that people like ourselves and our sort of culture here have seen, because they're in the same way that people are getting phones for the first time and they are not plugged into a wall somewhere. They're a cell phone, and that's their understanding of what cell phones are. And that sort of mentality allows for you to leapfrog a lot of that infrastructure that we're familiar with, and allows for you to be maybe a little more creative with the applications. I think it's similar with insurance in that, people are used to having insurance claims and going through a very long, arduous process. Whereas people, this is all automated through smart contracts. And if that's the way that you're first exposed to insurance, I think that it allows for you to potentially have a little bit more flexibility in the way that you think about these things. And maybe the innovations that we see might be more, we'll see. But I do think that leapfrog phenomenon is going to be really interesting in regions like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for your motorcycle incident too, it's like if there's a police report, and if you file a police report, and that's something that you could also verify with an oracle, it gives you people the opportunity to cut out a lot of the middlemen there, get some of that bureaucratic red tape out of the way, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. So that's everything I had on NFT ticketing, which is cool, and then and insurance on chain, which is also cool in a very different way.
It's very cool. And those are important to highlight. Those are 2 things that have nothing to do with the ballooning price of assets, which people tend to get into crypto for. They see weird prices and they're like, I need to get in on that. It's a very cool way that people are playing around with the tech and building something that isn't really meant to make a bunch of people rich. It's meant to make a bunch of processes easier, which hopefully we see more of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are a lot of people working on random things that are not getting the headlines, and so you got to do a little digging to find these. But I was interested to see that Lemonade is a good example, and they're all on chain. But there's a consortium of existing insurers who have a buttload of money, and just they're interested in analyzing this tech. And so in 30 years, we're going to see a lot of, regardless of the regulatory framework. I think that these are some of the most influential organizations in the world as a result of the cash reserves they have. And so they're going to be influential in regulatory sort of, pushing. So I don't think it's going anywhere. It's one thing to speculate on pictures of people or pictures of cartoons or something, but I think it's a different thing but that's art, like we've said in the past. And so I think that, it's interesting. I'm 100% with you ultimately.
Yeah, man. It's great. Cool. Let's kick it to the next one. So, Charlie, have you heard of ChatGPT?
Oh, dude, I love it. I feel like it's my little brother or like my big brother. I don't know. I use it. I mean, every day, all day.
Overlord.
Yeah, I love it. I use it all the time.
Yeah, so we've clearly seen a huge balloon over the last 8 months in interest in AI because a company, OpenAI, released ChatGPT, which is a something they've been working on for a while, but it's basically an interface where you can type in any question or statement and it'll feed you information, and people have been really impressed with it. We've seen Microsoft invest in a bunch of money into them. I don't have the exact amount, but it invested a bunch into OpenAI, and they've now integrated ChatGPT into their Bing search engine. And then Google just is releasing, like, people can get access now to Bard, which is a competitor to ChatGPT, but is the same thing. It's almost just a command line where you type in what is called a prompt. So you prompt it, it gives you an output, and people have been super impressed with them. So I wanted to go into prompt engineering because it's something that I've been stoked on and super excited. And I think it's a field that will be growing a lot over the next decade. And there's still plenty of time to like get into it for people who are interested. But basically,
I
at the
mean,
essence,
Chat
go ahead.
GPT-4 is like it's like less than a month old.
Yeah,
So like, you just to be clear, this is brand new tech, like
brand
super
new.
new. And there have been different numbers of it. 4 just came out in that time
Yeah,
frame. 3 came up before that, which is really legit, but ultimately slightly smaller in scope and its breadth of understanding of things.
yeah.
But
It's got that
and that
new
word
tech
understanding
smell,
is
man.
maybe it. Yeah, exactly. But just
Yeah,
to say, like, the prompt engineering at a high, I'm this is like the cool, like really interesting. Eric's been diving super deep into this, and it's like, how would you explain what prompt engineering actually is? I guess is
yeah.
to start.
So prompt engineering is basically just you're always to interact with it. So it's a natural language processor. They call them NLPs. To break it down for people who maybe don't understand the difference between Google, which is a search engine, and then this, a natural language processor, is taking actual human language and then using that instead of programming and giving you an output from a huge database. So it's also a reason engineering. You could be you can ask it specific questions and it can solve problems for you, which is really cool. So the big
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing with a prompt engineering is making the best, we call it an input is what you type in, making the best input possible to get like crazy outputs,
Mm-hmm.
and make the software work better. So yeah, basically like natural language processors, computer, it just allows computers to understand and work with human language. And now with GPT or chat GPT, GPT-4, Bard, it's prompting's more accessible to more people. You have millions of people. I think ChatGPT has been the fastest growing tech product like ever. I think it got
Yeah,
to 100 million users in a few months. Got to a million
I thought it
users
was,
in
yeah,
4 days. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Yeah,
it's fucking
and also
crazy.
the
It just
promise here is, Mike, you had mentioned the Microsoft thing. They put in 10 billion. That's what they approved.
okay.
So it's a very large number, and they didn't buy
That's
it outright. So it's just like a small portion of it, but
yeah.
the
It's
upside
super
here
cool
is really
technology.
large. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super large. And it's worth understanding prompt engineering going into it because I've seen there's been posts of people seeing prompt engineer jobs go up, which is basically hiring
Oh
people who
wow.
are very good and like six-figure jobs, like high six-figure jobs, for
Wow.
figuring out how to prompt AI well to get whatever the business needs out of the software.
Hmm.
So just we'll go into a few use cases of what you can do with prompt engineering across like different apps. But one is customer support, so you can craft prompts that help chatbots understand something that a user is dealing with better. And then it gets you, if you do it right, you can get a more accurate and helpful response. And it can just be quick, you know. If you can do a really good prompt for a customer service chatbot, you can take out a lot of the time that it takes for an actual person to answer a question. It can be
Exactly.
automatic. And the way that it phrases it, since it's natural language processing and it's a large language model, will make it sound in a way that humans understand, and it seems like it's a human, which is cool.
Hmm.
Uh, Another cool one that's specific to me because I work in marketing is content creation. So you can design a prompt to generate creative content anywhere from blog posts, social media captions, advertising copy, and you can specify like tone, style, the target audience. You can one cool thing that I've been playing around with is taking brands that I like, feeding content through a prompt and asking it to describe the style in detail, then taking the way it describes the style and having it do it for a piece of my content. So you'd get it to describe the style and then be like, use this source material and write in my writing style. And then you tell it that your writing style is XXX, then you feed it the source material, you hit enter, and then it makes whatever piece of marketing, like any piece of content you need in that style. It's not perfect. I'm still doing a lot of edits, but it's a cool field. And if you can get really good at prompting stuff for content creation, it makes creating something that used to take a years of practice, like you can make it really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You describe your style as triple X, XXX.
Yeah. Right, a triple XXX sloppy, dirty tweet.
It's funny. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Talking of dirty, you could prompt in. You could say, how much water does it take to fill the Grand Canyon, and then
Yeah.
it'll tell you in liters of volume. And then you can ask it how much ejaculate you can fill, and it won't tell you. It says, "I know
Yeah.
I'm a large language model. I can't speak about something profane." It's like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, they have those safeguards are built in by people. So they've done a lot to
Yeah.
try and, I mean, there's bad things you can prompt. You could prompt like, what's the easiest way to kill 100 people, which they clearly don't want you to do.
Will it answer
So
you?
no.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah,
I
I thought
saw
you
a
were saying
guy
it would answer you.
No, I saw a guy that was like, I got banned. His computer got banned from using ChatGPT because he was asking how to make a homemade bomb, and I was like, yeah, of course, that's great. Don't ask it
Yeah,
that.
dude.
Don't make homemade bombs. So
Yeah, seriously.
they've been working on a lot of safeguards, and it won't answer a lot of questions. They're working on kind of the bias in answers now, but there's a lot more you can do with it too. Data analysis, education, sentiment analysis, which is cool. You can take something, even if it's just to reply somebody, and you can be like, can you give me accurately gauge the sentiment and whatever this is? Could be a customer review, comments, uh, some sort of feedback you're getting from somebody. Can do language translation as well. So
Crazy.
there's some really cool real-time things that could be built with it and translating from different languages. And then code generation is a huge one.
Yeah, it's
So
amazing.
you can design a prompt that generates code snippets or fixes bugs in applications or websites, and it does it real fast. It can do it repetitive. You can ask it to fix specific things or tweak things. I've actually done it. I'm not an engineer by any means, and I've built web apps in the last few weeks, and it's
Yeah, I
walked me
know,
through it.
and they're
Which,
good. They
yeah,
work.
they were
Yeah,
good
it's
and they work.
amazing.
I know.
Yeah,
So it's been really cool. I think there's huge opportunity for it to open up for creative people who maybe are like, I'd never be able to build the next cool social media app. You could, and you could do it as a one
seriously,
person team, at least like a minimal viable product. You can build working things with this, which is really cool.
it really is
So
amazing.
yeah, it's awesome. So I think one of the things I've been harping on, because I realized I've been talking to people and I wasn't using it for months as like hardcore prompt engineering. I used it and thought it was cool and then kind of didn't use it that often. And I realized probably 99% of people aren't getting in there and getting their hands dirty. And I've committed to like doing different prompts and working on prompt engineering every day, which has been fun. And I think there's still plenty of time, years you could still take time and learn it, get in early and become a savant, because it's going to be a huge skill understanding the best ways to interact with these AI technologies and get the best output from them. Because you can't just say, write me a tweet for this Twitter account. You need to say, put for it to understand. There's things like that it would understand because it is a language processor. You need to talk to it like a human, and you need to be very specific. Since it's a reasoning engine, you need to give it a lot of information and as much context as possible. So you'd be
Mhm.
like, please write a tweet that is concise, educational, and breaks down the following concepts in an easy to understand way for a fifth grader, And something
Mhm.
like that will give you a really interesting output. I also think there's going to be crazy job opportunities that just come up out of it, jobs we don't even understand yet. It feels extremely
Seriously.
early, and getting to use some of this tech and playing around with it. It also makes it way easier to do your job sometimes. Like
It does.
if you can save yourself hours a week to go do something else, I see that as a net positive. A lot of people have been worried that it's going to take people's jobs. And I've heard the thing that I relate to the most is it's more of like a human amplification. So it amplifies the things you can do. It's not going to completely take over your job. That's far, far away from where we're at now. And there's ample opportunity to use it to be way better at the things that you like and to do things that you probably wouldn't have tried, because it takes 1/100th of the time and allows you to do insane, crazy shit. It's really cool.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. I really don't like the idea that it's like gonna. I mean, yeah, it's controversial. Like, there are really interesting philosophical conversations to have about it, and there are certainly people having those who are way more qualified than we are to have that conversation. And like, I love listening to Sam Harris talk about it. You shared that interview yesterday with Sam Altman, which is really interesting. I listened like the first 10 minutes. I wasn't able to finish it today, but a lot of people are talking about it. Really interesting to think about. I think it's worth sort of diving into that if you're interested in it, and not just assuming it's bad. There's some
Yeah.
really nuanced conversations to be had. But I do really like the idea, instead of thinking about it as like, oh, this is going to take all of our jobs. I feel like that's such a lazy argument to make. You see it a lot, though. I'm surprised by how much staying power that argument has, because when
Yeah.
you really analyze it, it doesn't really, that's not the way that history has ever worked. And so I just, and there have been so many innovations. And so I'm just not so sure that I mean, maybe again,
Yeah.
maybe I'm naive, but I just don't see how it's going to be, especially, I guess that because there are people who are innovative and thinking about it from a way that's more excited or excitable, then they're going to be leveraging it. And the people who are maybe more Luddites and not as interested, they're ultimately going to be left behind. Is that good or bad? I don't necessarily know. You know, we live in a capitalistic economy. It's like, that's just the kind of way, the way it seems to work.
Yeah.
So I
I
don't
mean, I
necessarily
think
think that it's
for
good or
some of
bad.
the
I think it's
big tech
interesting.
revolutions, like, you didn't see computers completely, or Amazon hasn't completely gotten rid of a Walmart or a Target, or these people adapt in their own ways. When they went from like assembly line creating cars to having more robots do it, there's opportunities to learn, if you're interested, how to manage the technology that they're building on top of it, which makes everything easier, which is a net positive, and you can also make more money if you want
Yeah.
to. And I honestly think most people who work in, day-to-day jobs can cut the amount of time they're actually doing things on their computer in half, easy, if not even more than that. um, which is a
Yeah.
crazy concept to be like, that's within a year if you really work on it. But uh, Sam Altman is really cool, and he says one thing, he's like, you want to sound crazy, but you also want to be right for some of this stuff. And it does sound
Interesting.
crazy to be very into prompt engineering, but my belief is that it is right that, like, you can get really good at talking to these things, and you're going to be able to do really fun things and help a lot of people, and potentially work 2, 3 jobs and do even better work all at the same time if you wanted, which is
Yeah.
really, yeah, it's a good
It's
opportunity.
amazing. I mean, there's like, I was talking about this with you yesterday. It's like there's 20 years of experience that we have of certain querying search engines and understanding sort of what words to use, which rabbit holes to dive into, which resources to use, which search engines to think about, which resources to depend on, whether it's Wikipedia or Reddit or the FBI's website for that fraud information I found earlier. Like, there are all sorts of different, and like, you start to get these things really ingrained in your head over 20 years, and become habits, and you become, I think that we're both probably really, really good at querying information through search engines in a way that maybe some people have a harder time with. Um, but when it comes to this has changed my workflow very significantly in terms of finding new information, which is obviously a huge part of every day. And instead of starting with Google, most often, for certain things like flights, I still go to the resource that I find most valuable, Google Flights. But for something like, explain to me the history of the internet, or really anything. Can you please provide me with examples of small business standard operating procedures, just so that I could better understand? And that, those sorts of queries I could make in Google, and then ultimately go through several different resources, and maybe hopefully find some sort of business textbook or something like that on Google Reads, and like go through the different chapters of it. But ultimately, this takes that information and synthesizes it, and then if it presents it in an essay, you could say, could you please explain this portion? Or you could then say, oh, could you rephrase it in bullet points, and maybe highlight these things as most important. And you could, or then categorize it by these different things, like by HR, business, and engineering. Could you categorize? And so it really is, and it's back and forth. So you don't provide one prompt and it provides you with an output. It's back and forth. It's a chat. It feels like
Yeah.
you're in a chat room with somebody.
Yeah, it's like a
Um,
discovery process a little bit, with a lot of refining
exactly.
and a lot of learning. There's
And it's
little,
free.
yeah, yeah, it's
It's
free.
free.
I know.
It's amazing.
Chat.openai.com. It's amazing.
Yeah. Also, you can, somebody I'd seen queried yesterday, can you describe yourself as an image? And then it wrote this flowery description, and they used DALL-E, which is an image generator, to create an image for ChatGPT, which is the beautiful glowing network of nodes that were all connected with wires. Is really, really cool.
That's cool.
So you can ask it really weird things too. You don't have to ask about standard operating procedures, or what the tone is of an email that you received, or making sure that if you write something and you want to present that in a way that's maybe more succinct, you can provide it with a piece of whatever it is you've written and asked it to make it more succinct, and then you can use that as your draft instead, which is really effective way sometimes as well. And then, but also it can be very creative. You can ask it to write a poem. You can ask it to, create a game. You could ask it to, help you think about creative ideas. I haven't used it so much in those ways, but you do see a lot of really creative applications for it, which are cool. And like learning how to query these things and get at the root of what you want is sort of similar and analogous to me as like the work that we've put in over years of like having how to search for information effectively. But this is like getting ahead of it when it comes to like, how do I get the best information for what it is that I'm trying to find on ChatGPT? And I feel as though I've heard some people talk about it since you started talking about it, but it's really made me much more efficient with my time on it, just going through it. Like it's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. Last thing I'll say on it too is on the prompt engineering side, if it feels like overwhelming, you can just, if you don't know how to craft the right prompt, you can go to ChatGPT, say we'll use a basic thing like a list of things you should do this weekend. Say, I want to write a prompt to get the best output for a list of things I want to do this weekend. Can you help me craft that prompt? And then it'll give you the prompt. You can copy it, paste it directly still and right there, and it'll give you an amazing output. So
it's cool.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to try that. Prompt the prompt.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff being built in this space, and I think we'll continue to see. Yeah. I mean, we spent so much time the last few years talking about distributed ledger stuff in our free time. And then the last couple of months, we've spent a lot of time talking about AI and some of these tools that are being built. And I just feel as though it's going to allow for this incredible wealth generation that just sort of like, it has been an idea that people have spoken about. Like AI is not a new idea, but it's sort of ratcheting up its availability to people like us. It's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it. So we'll have a lot more to talk about in the next however many years.
Yeah, that's great, man. We'll come up with some more fun topics too.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. Nice, dude. You got any hot takes this week?
I do. Yeah. I have, what was it? Oh yeah. So it's not really that hot, honestly. What I was thinking about is like this week, last week into this week, March was full of a lot of travel for me. And I felt a little bit overwhelmed. I have a few different things like we do this, which is, it's relatively informal, but it's really helpful if we've prepared properly for it. And so it's been hard for me to manage some of my time. And I've never been, you've been a good friend of mine for over 10 years. And one thing I'm really good at is hanging out. Like I'm really great at being there in person with you and chilling. I'm not so necessarily good at like planning in advance and making sure that I'm like well prepared for things. I'm like a chronic procrastinator, and I'm trying to just sort of like nip that in the bud a little bit after like years of just sort of like being a little bit complacent about it. But I think that I've been able to find the system where I'm like using to-dos on a very short-term basis, using a calendar on the level above that to sort of define different things that I have on the short term. And then one level above that is using like a writing tool so that I can ultimately write down some longer-term goals. And I've done these things for years, but I've had them in disparate places. And sometimes I can write something that's relatively maybe meaningful to myself, but it's in a place that I don't check as often as I probably should or could. And ultimately then I end up forgetting about things. And the same thing goes in that same vein for reading things, constantly reading things, but also constantly not remembering where I've read them. And ultimately having that source material. So I started to use I did a bunch of research over the last weekend. I found some different apps and I tested them Monday, Tuesday, and now I finally have committed to several of them. And so, it takes a couple bucks, it is what it is to spend money. Software engineers deserve to get paid, I would argue. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, I'm trying really hard to sort of organize these things in a way that allows me to be much more efficient. And obviously using ChatGPT helps with that to a certain extent, because some of these things are sort of, I'd like to create templates for different things and certain of these roles that I have and juggle them and manage them all effectively together. But at the same time, the onus is on you to sort of like take that by the horns and try to sort of iron it out. And it's been tough, but it's good. I'm really happy about it. My sleep has been suffering because I've been just like trying to do this and I'm so focused on it. So I've really been sleeping that much this week, but that's okay. It'll all iron itself out over time. But I do think there's like an organizational thing that I'm excited about. So we'll see how that works. If we continue to be as prepared as we can be these next few weeks and then months, whatever, then you'll know it's going well. And if we crumble and make this like a hip hop podcast, that's something happening poorly.
If we get on one week and we have no topics, then you'll be like, I need to go back to episode 11.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? What's your hot take?
My hot take's gonna be so I've done improv for years, improv comedy, and I'm currently going back and taking a class, which is something that a lot of people don't do. Super fun though, and it's a good way to like break up your week and do something extremely goofy. One of the core things of improv is like you kind of just go out there and you support the people you're doing scenes with, and you just say yes to almost everything. So it's been fun, and it's fun to get out of the habit of not regular days with like 2 hours of doing goofy stuff in a class each week. It's super fun.
Yeah, I've seen Eric do improv countless times. So funny. I don't know, 20, maybe not that many, but many. They're always hilarious. Gosh. Yeah. But in several different places. I've seen them, in different cities. So it's cool.
Yeah, man. That's the hot take. I think that's all we got though this week.
Love it. Awesome, man. Sweet. So I think shout out to Josiah Soren for NFT Leopards, Lo-Fi Leopards, excuse me, an NFT project that has hip hop beats that we have in our intro. And yeah, welcome to episode 11, which was the first episode that didn't have the word crypto in the name. So we slightly changed the name.
Blue Hour now.
Yeah, officially the Blue Hour. So we happen to both wear all of our blue clothing.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't even realize.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Nice, man. Cool. All right. Well, I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you then.